Welcome to Harry Cole Saves the West, the show American grit meets British backbone. So round and round and round we go again. The latest Putin-Trump meeting is off. No Budapest, no breakthrough. Once again, the Kremlin's maximalist demands for a Ukrainian routing leave Russia isolated. They're the only party refusing to join a ceasefire, and the talks are back to square one. But was there a crashing sense of inevitability to this latest stalemate? We've been here before. Putin playing for time, Ukraine begging for more and more support to finish the job, and a US president, frankly, blowing hot and cold. Meanwhile, the Colombia confrontation, another president musing about getting rid of Trump as South America teeters towards chaos. Tonight, it's kicking off everywhere. And joining me live in the studio is Adrian Gray and what this means for the White House. But first, live from London, Sir Bill Browder, the man they say is Putin's #1 enemy, and what's really driving the Kremlin. Good evening, Sir Bill. That's Brent there, though. We've got, we're also joined by Brent there. Former Navy reservist, and now with the Heritage Foundation. I think we've lost Bill there. But Brent, we're going to start with you. Yes. There is Bill as well. We've got everyone tonight. Bill Browder, first of all with you. Putin's playing the West like a cheap fiddle here, isn't he?
Well, it doesn't have to be that way, but it seems to be that way. And I think what everybody needs to understand is that Putin is the guy who started this war. The Ukrainians didn't start the war. Putin invaded Ukraine, and it's within his sole power to end this war. And he doesn't want to end this war. And the reason he doesn't want to end this war is because the reason that he started this war is in order to stay in power. This comes straight out of Machiavelli 101. He was worried about the Russian people rising up against him. And the best way of dealing with a restive population is to distract them, to create a foreign enemy and to start a war. And that's what this war is about. He needs this war to stay in power. And he needs to be in power to stay alive. And so you basically have this little man, Putin is a tiny little man, who's desperately afraid of his own people, who's desperately afraid of dying. And the war is what keeps him in power and alive. And so I don't think that there's pretty much anything that we can do to get him to agree to stop this war. The only way that he's going to stop this war is if he loses this war. And we're not doing a whole lot in that direction to help the Ukrainians with the equipment they need, with the Tomahawk missiles they need, and with the types of crippling financial oil sanctions that we need to do on Russia to deprive Putin of the money that he's getting. And so, in my opinion, and I've been saying this from day one, this war will go on and on and on, and there's really nothing we can do to stop it other than to help the Ukrainians win the war.
Do you think President Trump realizes that, though? Because it seems to me we keep getting into these vicious circles where there's a big flurry of activity. There's, we saw the Anchorage summit over the summer, and then Putin sort of stalls for time and the talks don't happen. And we've seen exactly the same thing play out this week with the 2-hour phone call between the Kremlin and the White House, and then all this talk of Budapest. And then, lo and behold, when Marco Rubio picks up the phone to Lavrov, nothing has changed. How many more times are we going to go round this circle, do you feel, before the President of the United States realizes that Putin, exactly as you say, Sir Bill, has no interest in coming to peace?
Well, I mean, that requires some type of deep insight into President Trump's mind, and I don't have that ability, and I think nobody has that ability. I mean, he's completely unpredictable. And so the one thing I can say is that Donald Trump, he prides himself as a deal maker. But Putin doesn't do deals. Deals require that both sides, come to terms, that there's some compromise in the middle, and Putin doesn't do that. And I know exactly how he thinks and how he operates, and it's not even unique to Putin. It's sort of a Russian gangster thing, which is that that you never, as a Russian gangster, they never show any sign of weakness. They never show any type of compromise, and so. Trump is in this world where he's wheeling and dealing, and I'll give you this and you take that, and in most circumstances, there's the possibility of coming to terms with an adversary or with an opponent in a negotiation, but that just doesn't work with Putin. And so the question is Trump at some point ready to say this guy is impossible to deal with, and the only thing we can do is show him strength, or is he not? And I should point out that it all looks pretty terrible, what's going on, but it's not unique to Donald Trump. Pretty much every other previous president all started out trying to placate and deal with Putin. You can remember there was that famous George Bush incident where he looked into Putin's eyes and saw his soul. And it took Bush about 6 months before he understood who Putin was. And then there was President Obama, who wanted to do a, quote, Russian reset. And
big
again,
red button, yeah.
And it all went horribly wrong. And so, will Trump come to the same conclusion that everyone else has come to? I hope so, because that's the only way that we're going to finally get to the end of this whole ugly mess.
Yeah, well, we understand that the president did directly threaten to deploy Tomahawk missiles that could reach the Moscow, rattle a few windows in Moscow, could reach the Kremlin itself. When he did speak to Putin last week, Zelensky saying today that actually the fact that he went a bit cool on that was a direct gave direct succor to Putin to walk away from any diplomatic means. Do you think it is that simple and that black and white, or were we really that close to a breakthrough this week, or is it just pointless? I mean, without those missiles, we're nowhere.
Well, I'm not sure the missiles are going to be the game changer that determines the outcome of the war. I think the missiles were more important as a symbol. If President Trump provided those missiles to Ukraine, it might have been a symbol that he had gone from being a sort of dismissive and sort of denigrating Ukraine to being an ally of Ukraine. I think that it was more about the symbolism than the actual missiles. I mean, Ukraine produces its own what they call flamingo missiles, which don't have quite the effect of Tomahawks, but they have quite a range as well as the drones that they can send in all sorts of interesting places. And so I don't think the Tomahawks were so much, I mean, I'm sure the Ukrainians would love to have the Tomahawks, but the most important part of the whole thing was that it would show that Trump had changed his tune towards Ukraine. Now, why would Trump think before his conversation with Putin that it would be okay to supply the Tomahawks, and then Putin convinces him that there'd be no diplomacy afterwards? I don't know, how that logic would work, but what I can say is that it certainly doesn't look good if Trump has made various ultimatums or made various threats and then walks back from them. And I should point out that this is the 9th time that Trump has made a threat or issued an ultimatum in which he's backed down from. And so, the famous story of the boy who cried wolf, and that is what Trump unfortunately is becoming when it comes to dealing with Vladimir Putin. Now perhaps there's some method to this madness, and perhaps the 10th time he actually follows through, and Putin is just like amazed, thinking he had mastered Trump. Who knows? But in general terms, if you're dealing with a thug, you don't make threats and then back off of them. You make threats and follow through with them.
Yeah, I suspect there's a few Iranian nuclear scientists that would have a different interpretation of whether Donald Trump follows up on his word. But on that point with Putin, that you've seen the way this Kremlin works, this dictator works. He's playing mind games, isn't he? He's getting into Donald Trump's sort of buttons. He phoned up last week to congratulate him on the Hamas Gaza-Israel deal. Has Donald Trump, do you think, bitten off more than he can chew with this particular, canny operator makes him sound nice, but you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think that part of the problem is that Donald Trump was on the campaign trail before he became president, on every single speech saying, I can end this war in 24 hours. And so, people didn't forget that. And he knows that people didn't forget that. And so he's kind of got this problem of having made these completely, exaggerated promises that he now feels like he has to follow through on. And Putin has no interest in ending the war under any circumstances, on any terms, because Putin needs this war. And so, it's hard to know how Trump is thinking about this. I'm not an expert on Trump's thinking, but what I can say is that Putin will continue doing this. And this is, by the way, look at what happened. So Trump was on the verge of sanctioning Russian oil before the Anchorage, Alaska summit. And Putin became desperate with that whole thing. And so they agreed in a very hastily arranged summit. And at the end of the summit, there were no sanctions on the oil. And then we fast forward, I guess that was August, we fast forward to October, and there's Tomahawk missiles on the table. Putin calls up, and there's no Tomahawk missiles. I don't know what the conversations, what happened during these conversations, but Putin is playing for time, and he's gotten his time, and the longer he's able to do this, the better off he is. And what Putin is banking on is that eventually that somehow the will of the West breaks. You know, America has pretty much stopped supplying military aid to Ukraine, but Europe continues to do so. And Putin is sort of playing for time because he knows that in France you have Marine Le Pen, who is funded by Russia. In Germany you have the AfD, and all sorts of places you have these potentially helpful
useful idiots,
Putin allies, and he's hoping that, like, you know, the whole will of the European Union breaks, and then there'll be nobody helping Ukraine. I think that's his ultimate game, and he just needs to play it out, and without tomahawks and without oil sanctions.
So, Bill Browder, stay there. I'm going to bring in Brent Sadler, who we saw briefly at the top of the show there, former US Navy commander and now a senior fellow with the Heritage Foundation. Good evening, Mr. Sadler. We're discussing there with Sir Bill that it does look from a layman's perspective that Putin is playing Trump like a cheap fiddle, stalling for time and getting it. What do you think's going on? And is there method to this madness?
Oh, absolutely. I agree with much what Sir Bill said there. Putin is very adept, and he studies the character and the psychology, as a good KGB agent is trained to do, to try to get inside the mind of your opponent. In this case, it's President Trump. And he's been successful, but he's been frustrating him at the same time. Thus, the Tomahawks, but I'd also mention the other weapons that have been authorized to be delivered, the ERAMs, which are an air-launched weapon that can reach the outskirts of Moscow, not Moscow proper necessarily, from the airspace over Ukraine. So the only thing that's really going to matter, I think there's a fallacy here of personal diplomacy, friendships and knowing world leaders, that those relationships only go so far. And I think that's bearing out here. What really matters is setting the context and setting the cost-benefit analysis of your adversary on the other side of the negotiating table. And that's where the secondary sanctions on Russia's biggest benefactors, both in industrial but also buying Russian oil, the Chinese. And then secondarily, the Indians, who are also an American partner, strategic partner in so many ways. That's why he got on the plane, and I agree with Sir Bill on that, why Putin got on the plane to go to Anchorage. But as soon as the pressure let off, and he never changed, the reality is on the ground, and that was not missed by President Trump and many on his team here in D.C. The Tomahawks got him on a phone call. And I think words were spoken between Secretary of State and Lavrov that made that meeting kind of fall off as just another indication of stringing along. So, you know, fool me once, he's not going to be able to fool him again. And I think that's clear. What comes next is the real question. But the conditions and the cost have to be imposed on Putin before he's compelled to come to the negotiating table. And I think Mother Nature also has a hand in this. The weather changes, and the operations on the battlefield and the historically tremendous muddy fields of Ukraine sets in here very soon. And that'll also have a natural dampening, and maybe we'll see an acquiescence just as a reality on the battlefield for Putin to actually engage in negotiations.
But isn't it just stringing along till get to winter? The fighting stops, you know, the people hunker down. It gives Russia a chance to rearm, to resupply their troops. Isn't that just clearly the tactic of stringing it along until the midwinter, come again in the spring, another offensive, just keep buying time to inch and claw their way through those eastern territories?
Well, if I may, I think the Russian people are fed up with this war. You get anecdotal evidence that comes out from Russia, and I think this is also one of the things that goes into Putin's calculations. There's only so long that he can really keep the cost borne by the outerlying areas before the middle class and the upper class in Russia start to bear very explicitly the cost of this war. But there's a war weariness also in Russia that I think might make this the final thrust of the fighting. But I think it's very clear that both the Ukrainians and the Russians still think they've got a lot of fight left. And again, that's why we're not seeing any real meaningful movement to the table. And again, I think the pressure's got to be put on Putin and also the cost on the battlefield at the same time.
So, Bill, do you agree with that? Are we seeing a sort of, we've been hearing about, sort of Russian mothers rising up and Russian middle classes feeling the pain and not being able to, the economy, being pivoted to a wartime economy, meaning people back home are suffering. But as yet, no, sort of marked uprising against the regime. Are you as optimistic as Mr. Sadler here that things could be on the turn and this is the, quote, last thrust?
Well, I think the problem in Russia is that it's not a democracy. So, Putin doesn't have the same, he's not accountable in the same way as any other head of state would be. He doesn't have to appeal to his people. He doesn't have any laws that he has to follow. He doesn't have a parliament. He doesn't have a free press that criticizes him. And so he's kind of a one-man show who can decide exactly what he wants. And I don't disagree that there's a lot of pain and suffering. There's an unbelievable amount of pain and suffering. I think more than 1.1 million young men are either dead or disabled because of this war, Russian men. And of course, they have all, mothers and sisters and sons and daughters who almost be beside themselves with loss and devastation. But the problem is that they're not voters. I mean, they might, in theory be voters, but they're not really voters. And so, and if Putin thinks that people are getting more restive, he does two things. One, he carries on with the war and gets everyone all lathered up with anger towards the Ukrainians. And two, he represses the people. And in Russia, if you just say a bad word about the war or a bad word about Putin, at best you lose your job, or you go to jail, or perhaps they even kill you. And so people are scared. It's just the repression is so intense there. So I think that in my opinion, Putin's ultimate superpower in his ability to be carrying on with this war and so on is his absolute indifference to the loss of life. And I'm not sure that loss of life can't be extended. I'm not sure if Russia can't lose another million people and have it not change the conditions on the ground in Russia. There's talk now about expanding the drafting of reserve soldiers and putting them on the front line. And they're looking for every possible way of getting more warm bodies, red meat to the cannon fodder of the front line. And they lose 1,000 soldiers a day. In the West, if this were to happen in the West, the war would be over in 2 weeks because there'd be so much anger about having 14,000 soldiers dying. But in Russia, they can lose more than 1 million and carry on.
Brendan Sadler, Putin doesn't have voters, Donald Trump does, the Republicans do. How much time and patience do you think, A, the Republican support base have for this sort of stringed out negotiations, and B, we hear noise from inside the administration that they're very frustrated with Putin refusing to give any meaningful concessions. Where do you put Donald Trump on this, and where do you put the wider Republican movement?
Well, I think there's an acceptance that you have to deal with Russia as Russia is, and have to deal with Putin as someone that's not an honest broker, and certainly not in a mind to actually enter into honest negotiations. I think all of what you've seen since President Trump came in was perhaps a necessary movement through that, as failed as it was, and as long as it was strung along. It was necessary to convince many in the conservative, not all, but many in the conservative side of the House here in the United States, that every effort was to try to find a quick solution, a negotiated end to the war that was acceptable to the United States. At the end of the day, it's America first. It's American interests that matter the most. And clearly, nothing seems to work. And even given what were perceived as good deals and good offers to Putin, wasn't enough. And so now we're running right into American national interests. And the conservative movement, I think, is much more united than you might have seen back 6 months ago on this topic, to push back, to provide weapons, to try to compel Putin in a real way to come to the table and negotiate the end. The reality is, I think, still is the consensus here is the numbers, and it's a numbers game on the military side. There isn't a real clear victory path with what the Ukrainians have at hand right now to be able by force of arms to take back all the territory. but there is a path forward through the force of arms to compel Putin to a table, to a truce that is a sustainable peace that also meets American national interest, which, oh, by the way, that's also in NATO national interest as well, or alliance interest.
Brent Sadler, stay there. You're going to join us in part two where we talk about South America. But a final question to Sir Bill Browder. It strikes me that, and lots of people, not my original thought, but people say that Donald Trump tends to, voice the last thing that someone said to him. When he speaks to Putin, he starts giving out Kremlin talking points. When he talks to European leaders and Zelensky, he starts to talk about Ukraine being able to win this war with the right support. You had 20 minutes in the Oval tonight with Donald Trump. What would you say to him?
Well, I would tell him what I've just told you and your audience, which is that Putin he has no interest in negotiating, and the only way to deal with a guy like this is a boot on the throat. And Trump is a tough guy, and he should use his tough guy tactics on Putin the way he has on other people. You mentioned Iran earlier in the conversation. I think that made a big impression on the Iranian regime. His ability to get the hostages released was very laudable. He has the capacity to be a very tough guy, and that's what he should use that capacity here with Vladimir Putin. And I think that 75% of Americans support Ukraine and think and like 92% think Putin is a villain. I think he would be applauded by the American people for doing this. I think it would be a politically correct and right thing to do, and it would help him.
Sir Bill Browder, thank you for joining us on Harry Kell, Saves the West. Brent, stay there. We'll see you after the break. Thank you, gentlemen. In the studio with me is Adrian Gray today. That point there that Bill Browder makes at the end about Donald Trump, and politically he needs this win. He does strike me as the president has bitten off more than he can chew. But as the gentleman there was saying, every time it seems he looks like he's going to give Putin a slap, Putin gets on the phone or Putin gets on a plane and manages to talk him down. They do have a point there, don't they?
They do. I think that was very insightful, what they had to say. I think at the end of the day, we also have to look globally here. There's a lot of wars going on. And President Trump ran on ending wars, and he's not backing off of that. I think what he's doing is actually trying to be more careful than not. People want to just slam him, but listen, as much as they want to say, you got to stick your, boot on Putin's throat, we also need to understand, as we're saying, he's a beast of its own. So I think President Trump is really trying to put one foot in front of the other, exhaust all of his diplomatic, I guess I would say nice guy, business tactics before he goes full nuclear.
Well, hopefully not full nuclear.
Well,
metaphorically
speaking.
But isn't that? Haven't we seen what's happened here? Is that after there's been a stalemate since August in Anchorage and there's that Alaska summit, and then we're back to square one again. And after the sort of success of the Hamas ceasefire last week, it strikes me as he sort of tried to capitalise that and quickly jump in and try and get Russia over the line at the same time or the same month, and actually nothing has changed and the fundamentals haven't changed, and whoever is telling the president that Putin is moving is giving him duff information.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Again, I think this all goes back to he wants to end these wars, and I think he wants to make the right move. I think it's far more complicated than any of us can understand, and I know we do commentary on it, but again, as everybody was saying, maybe this is one last shot, Do
you think he has the political, does he have the political capital to be able to go further? Obviously, he was, as you said, he was elected on a campaign to end these wars. America first doesn't necessarily mean America alone, but American priorities first. Is it not that he's slightly bound in by his base, who don't want further intervention, but further intervention is the one thing that's going to get Putin to the table?
That's a great point, Harry, because that is what's going on in the Republican Party right now, is the America first versus the international, I guess you would say, involvement we have, whether it be Israel, whether it be Venezuela, Colombia, or Russia and Ukraine. The only thing that I've seen that has changed is that we saw Zelensky show up in a suit. So he made that happen.
Yeah, yes, twice now. But
twice now.
Donald Trump, is he suddenly just going to have a sort of change of heart and say, you know what, enough is enough? It's quite embarrassing for the guy who says he's a deal maker to be humiliated by Putin here.
Absolutely. Listen, that man is, we have nothing, we have no other explanation other than he's working, he's doing his best, and hopefully the next action wins.
Well, Russia's not done, but is war about to break up on another front? Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. Lots more content there you won't want to miss. Next tonight is President Donald Trump sleepwalking into war in Latin America. What began as a drug mission off the coast of Venezuela with 7 strikes killing more than 30 people has now taken a sharp turn. A new player has entered the mix, Colombia. While Venezuela is mobilized, Russian-armed militias are itching. Now Colombia's leader, Gustavo Petro, is openly talking about getting rid of Trump, which is something of a red flag. Now, joining me now for a full breakdown of what's going on is analyst Raoul Mas, and Navy veteran Brent Sadler is still with us. Mr. Mas, take us up to date on the developments. What started with those strikes on narco boats, we can get into the details and the legality of that shortly. Now sounds like Trump threatening to put boots on the ground, striking, targets on South American soil. And now the Colombians are entering the knife fight with some pretty fruity threats. This is hotting up, right?
Yes, I don't think it necessarily equates to boots on the ground. There's no question that I'm sure Brent will confirm this, but that the naval force that we have in the Caribbean is quite robust. We have the USS Iwo Jima that I've had the pleasure to be on several times, as well as, I believe, 3 guided missile destroyers, a frigate, littoral combat ship. We have a lot of assets, 4,500 Marines and sailors on board. I wouldn't characterize that as an invasion force, but rather a very robust amphibious group ready to either insert or extract people from Venezuela as needed. They obviously have particularly destroyers, have a very strong strike capability if needed. We have F-35s in Puerto Rico. The Iwo Jima will have both fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft on board it. The U.S. is very well positioned for any possible contingency. The president has made it known that there are, in fact, a covert operation, a CIA covert operation taking place within Venezuela. We don't know exactly what the nature of that is, but I think the U.S. is doing more than saber rattling here, that's for sure. But I don't think it's a full-scale invasion. Obviously, an enormous amount of pressure being put on the Maduro regime.
Maduro says he will respond with fire to any aggression. How seriously should we take that? And how, we see sort of Venezuela painted as a sort of collapsing backwards dictatorship. But how seriously should we take those threats? And are they poking a Latino bear there?
I wouldn't describe him as a bear, but when you've got U.S. lives, U.S. forces in the area, with quite frankly overwhelming force at their disposal, any threat against those assets are going to be taken seriously. The U.S. is very well equipped to respond and respond quite decisively, given the nature of the force that they have assembled. But again, I don't think that's what the intention here is, not to provoke a war. The intention here is to displace a party or a group of individuals that are basically narco traffickers that have overstayed their welcome. Remember that in July of 2024, Venezuela had elections. And by all accounts, international observers, lots of people have said that the opposition party, Vente Venezuela, the unitary party that was led by Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez, defeated Maduro. And he's basically overstayed his welcome. He's an illegitimate regime. What we're trying to do here is put into place the democratically elected government of Venezuela that was elected in July of 2024. And the person and the party in power have refused to budge, I should say.
Brian Sadler, even US commanders admit they're operating in a, and I quote, an environment of high escalation risk. If you could put that into English for us, there is, as Rao says, it may not be the goal to do anything other than sort of target narco sites and narco targets, but there is a risk that this gets out of hand, isn't there?
Well, lethal force has been authorized, and you see that with the drug boats that are being taken out with casualties and killed in action being racked up. So with those military, should Venezuela decide or feel that they are in a place where their rules of engagement would dictate returning fire, I don't see that as very likely for the reasons that Raul mentioned already. It would be suicidal because what President Trump's military has arrayed is a pretty substantial hammer. And the name of the game for military operations is to provide your political leadership as many options to respond flexibly so your adversary can't anticipate and get ahead of you, and also so that you can control the dynamics. It's pretty clear that President Trump right now wants to keep this offshore and targeting the cartels. And I'd have to say, though, the public statements, I think, also judged by the military operations that are ongoing, taking out the cartels is the goal. Secondary or tertiary effects is that Maduro loses his backing from the money and the muscle that the cartels provide him at home to maintain his rule. And so by taking out the cartels, you indirectly are undermining a regime that I think has lived long past its due and is not the elected representative of the people of Venezuela either. And again, there's quite a lot of countries that do not recognize Maduro's government.
Gentlemen, more broadly put to you, Mr. Mass. The White House or the Pentagon still haven't given any key information on the names, identities of these people that have been taken out. Often in scenarios like this, there is, background briefings and information provided. There remains a large question about the precedent for this, the legal underwriting of these attacks. We had Senator Joni Ernst on last night, who said she'd been privately briefed that it was all tickety-boo and all above board. But it is a bit of a grey area the administration is operating in right now, isn't it?
Well, I think what you're seeing here is, quite frankly, the United States reasserting its dominance in the Western Hemisphere, reasserting the Monroe Doctrine, reasserting the Roosevelt corollary from the beginning of the 20th century, that basically is saying, look, we are not going to allow foreign players to interfere in the Western Hemisphere. And the fact of the matter is that there are foreign players at work here. Iran has had a long relationship with Venezuela, as has Russia. China buys the bulk of Venezuela's oil. And we know, the one thing I would disagree with Brent on is that, the cartel and the Maduro regime are not separate entities. They are one and the same. The Cartel de los Soles includes Nicolás Maduro, who has a $50 million bounty on his head. So, the U.S. has designated the cartel and therefore these ships that are operating as a foreign terrorist organization, which, again, I'm not a legal scholar when it comes to these matters, but I assume that means that they are, legal targets. I mean, they are viable targets. If we have designated them as a terrorist organization, they are seeking to cause harm to the United States. That's the justification. I think, quite frankly, most Americans are in favor of that. We're tired of seeing our citizens die on the street from fentanyl and heroin and cocaine. And I think, there's an existential threat here to Maduro because Maduro and the cartel, the Los Soles, are one and the same. These guys are not there defending the sovereignty of Venezuela. They are defending the billions of dollars that are coming into the country as a result of the drug trade. Venezuela now generates more money from the drug trade than they ever did producing petroleum. And by the way, Venezuela still has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, in excess of what Saudi Arabia has, but they're producing a fraction of it because they've, let it go to hell in a handbasket. And in the meantime, they focused on drugs instead of exporting oil.
Brent Sadler, are you confident the legal underwritings of this intervention are watertight?
There's clearly a precedent for what President Trump is doing in the international water space going after the cartels. It's not clear what the legal case is because it's been provided in a classified setting to Congress, but clearly the president acting within his constitutional prerogatives as the commander-in-chief, I think, is the legal basis on which he starts from.
And also, I mean, it's hard to try and pitch these as nice, innocent fishermen when they are in operating ginormous submarines. Raul Mas, how concerned we should be about the wider noise? Obviously, we saw what the president of Colombia was saying there today about getting rid of Trump. Could we see Venezuela's sort of erstwhile allies and regional partners start to up the ante too?
Yeah. Well, look, up until recently, Venezuela was a very strong partner of the United States. We were instrumental in helping the Colombians defeat the FARC, the revolutionary activities in Venezuela, in putting a lid on the drug trade. Unfortunately, a couple of years ago, they had elections, and they, in fact, elected a former member of the FARC to be their president. So, now we have this situation where you have two leftists, side by side, a president in Colombia and a dictator in Venezuela, both of whom are left-leaning, both of whom are, anti-U.S. for lack of a better word. I don't take Gustavo Petro that seriously. I don't think he's going to be around much longer. I think the Colombian people will come to their senses. He's got a whole lot of issues, including, I think, some serious mental issues. And I don't say that lightly. I think that, his behavior at times has demonstrated that. So, he may be kind of half-cocked, but I don't think he's a danger to the U.S. military. I don't think the Colombian military would, up until recently, one of the generals of the Colombian military was actually serving at U.S. Southern Command. He was part of the joint staff at U.S. Southern Command. So the U.S. military cooperation with the Colombian military has historically been very strong relationship and a very positive one. I don't see the Colombian military going to war with the U.S. given the historic nature that our two countries have.
Ben Sadler, you agree? Colombians all mouth, no trousers?
Yes, I think that's about right. I happened to be in Colombia and those elections were happening. It was surprising, but I don't think the Colombian people are enamored with their president anymore. And they're still a democracy, so I do think Petro's time is actually coming to a close, not a threat. But right now, the focus is going after the cartels, cut off their money and their markets, and hopefully weaken enough the Maduro regime that it collapses inward on itself. Though I agree, they are very closely aligned, if not one and the same.
Final question to you both. There's a $50 million price on Maduro's head for someone to get him to the United States alive. Both of you, you first, Raul, reckon someone out there is plotting it now, plotting an extraction, and do you think they'll be able to do it? You only need to get him to Puerto Rico, right?
I don't know, but it certainly has Maduro looking over his shoulder at all times. The one thing I will caution, though, is that even if you do have a successful regime change, if you will, it's going to be a mess afterwards. The transition is going to be very, very difficult. There are a lot of people. There's a deep state in Venezuela, which has been running this whole organization for years, and we're going to have to figure out a way to deal with them.
What about you, Brent Sadler? Are you joining my vigilante army to kidnap Maduro? You in?
Well, I think it's important to understand why that bounty is on his head is because he is definitely a narco criminal himself, and he is actively engaged in the trade, and that is with open now indictments on him, so you can actually see for yourself what the charges are, and a reasonable amount of, and an American standard, evidence against him is why. So it's not for geopolitical purposes, though that would also be a grounds for taking such action, but I'm more for the take out the money supply and let it collapse inward, and the Venezuelans decide how they want to govern themselves better after a Maduro regime.
Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Navy veteran Brent Sadler there and analyst Raul Mas. Come back and see us as this plays out. It's definitely a fascinating one for us to keep a very close eye on. Thank you for joining us. Still with me in the studio is Adrian Gray. Adrian, wouldn't the Republicans right now be saying, if this was a Democrat president doing this and the shoe was on the other foot, that this is an illegal war, it's an illegal intervention with no precedent, no basis, and it risks dragging America into yet another conflict, this time pretty much on its doorstep?
I'm glad you brought that up because I think the leftist media and honestly the globalist agenda, they've colluded together to also deny that this cartel is an issue. I mean, when you talk about the humanitarian crisis that's going on in Venezuela, everyone on the left and all the Democrats should be on board to
But they were cheering Maduro, half of them, weren't they?
Exactly, but it doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense. So I think it's interesting, and I think also, you know, they warn time and time again, President Trump, he's just going to start another war. He's going to start. Look at the facts and look at history. He's not starting wars.
Well, he's trying. I mean, he's risking. The U.S. commanders saying they're operating in an environment of a high escalation risk, which is basically saying this could go really badly wrong. And one stray drone strike on the wrong boat, and we're in very. Listen,
it could go bad. People also said that President Trump wasn't going to win the election again. You got to have faith.
Do you think that the American public seeing a president willing to take any means necessary, to coin a phrase, to stop the flow of fentanyl into the United States, stop the flow of illegal narcotics, trumps any concern, to coin another phrase, trumps any concern they have about the perhaps ethical and legal issues around this? This is raw politics, isn't it?
Yeah. Also, it's, you know, I'm not an expert on this. I don't know all the facts, but I think he has the best intentions here. And honestly, when you talk about the war on drugs, and we've talked about this before, what he ran on, trying to stop the drugs, I mean, they've done a lot of damage to the United States with these drug cartels.
Arguably an act of war in importing them into the United States. Interesting. All right. Well, from boats to Bibles. Now, Bible sales have surged after the assassination of Conservative activist Charlie Kirk. So after the break, we'll be asking, are we witnessing a new revival under younger Americans, or just a reaction to the chaos? Don't go anywhere. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Harry Cole Says the West. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. Now, has Gen Z, or as our American friends say, Gen Z, gone Bible? In the month following the assassination of Conservative activist Charlie Kirk, US Bible sales have surged by a whopping 36%. No fewer than 2.4 million copies of the good book were sold in September alone. Now, some evangelical leaders, easy for you to say, are calling it a revival. Others caution it may just be simply a moment, not a movement. With me is the Washington Examiner's Madeleine Grant-Schultz, and Adrian Gray is still with us in the studio. Madeleine, what's going on? We saw those astonishing scenes in Arizona for Charlie Kirk's funeral. We saw equally astonishing scenes at the White House. People are saying they're talking about God in a way they haven't for years. J.D. Vance says he's talked about Jesus more in the last month than he has in the last year. Is it fair that something's happening out there, or is it just a blip?
I think the positive thing for this idea of revival, the thing that makes me think maybe this is really happening, this has some staying power, is the fact that it was already kind of going on before the assassination of Charlie Kirk, before all of this kind of violence that I think kind of shook people awake. You've already seen trends of Gen Z becoming more religious. We have 2/3 of Gen Z identifying with religion. It's very rare historically for young people to be such a strong demographic of wanting to kind of pursue faith. And also 24% of them are going to church, which shows a real initiative that they want to be active in their faith. And so I think now that you see stuff like the Charlie Kirk assassination, people are really waking up.
Do you think it's linked to the sort of wider, we've been talked at length about the decline of, fascinating stats showing the decline of college students identifying as non-binary. We saw the election last year where America tilted rightward, especially younger Americans. Do these things go hand in hand? Is the cultural and political tilt back to the right, you could argue, also, is the religion part of that?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a backlash to not only sort of excesses of the left that people are seeing, but also this atomization. Gen Z is the generation of the iPhone and of the internet. They are not used to being in community, I think, the way that a lot of older generations are. And with them going to church, you see them building this community with like-minded people.
It's a rejection of the phones, the social media, being locked up for a large part of their formative years. Adrian, Donald Trump keeps talking about not getting into heaven. He keeps saying, "I'm not going to. You know what? I'm working on it, but I'm not quite sure." Obviously, you know, if you look at the president's career, life, past, him as a sort of religious pin-up is quite the journey, right?
Yeah, I think you've heard the Trumps talking about it a little bit more, but this just shows you the impact that's going on. I mean, for all of Gen Z, it's caused them to speak louder, pray louder, and go and buy Bibles and find community. And I think at the end of the day, you kill a generation that he basically, got behind his movement. You kill their leader. And what that does to people is it radicalizes them. And what we're seeing basically is AOC spitting word salad again, okay? She's basically now reusing all of the talking points that the left did to deem masculinity bad. She's coming out and she's saying, you know what? This is toxic masculinity. And so she wants these young men to apologize for being masculine. All the things that Charlie Kirk promoted in faith, in strong men in America. So you're also seeing those washed up talking points that are really going to hurt Democrats moving forward.
We all live in the sort of online sphere, certainly probably far more than we should. Is this revival really led online, or is it through more traditional means? I mean, we're seeing a surge of online sort of discussion of Christianity and of religion. Is this an online-led movement or a rejection of it, as Madeline sort of?
Well, I think it's a balance of both. It's a rejection of certain ideas that were started online, but Charlie Kirk, I mean, he capitalized on the internet, okay? Turning point in all of the right-wing media that we have, Daily Wire, everything. I mean, the numbers go crazy. And like she was saying, this generation, unlike the millennials, they were raised online. And Charlie Kirk was able to make online an interesting, good place to help formulate religion.
Madeline, do you think the established church movement, certainly in the United Kingdom where I'm from, there is the rise in Catholicism amongst younger people is actually going towards the Catholic Church, going towards the more traditional, ultra-traditional church, while, the sort of Church of England and the established church is still trying to sort of chase this non-existent woke come to church movement. What's it like in the United States? Are we seeing, is it more traditional denominations that are seeing this boost, or is it right across the line?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because a lot of the movement is actually for tradition and for this kind of connection to the past and people who have lived before. I think people, Gen Z is kind of aching for that feeling of belonging that you get from a connection to the liturgy. So you see a lot of people joining the Catholic Church, joining the Anglican Church, which I'm a part of, and you have those kind of prayers and connections that you feel like you're really part of something much bigger than yourself.
I want to talk about, I don't know, we could sit there and talk about religion for a long time, but instead we'll talk about the Maine Senate primary, where one of the candidates has got himself in a spot of bother in the fact that he has been revealed to have a Nazi tattoo. This is, I believe his name, Graham Planter. He says he got the tattoo when he was a Marine in Croatia, on land leave, which you can imagine was not a sober affair. Madeline, is it a career ender, presumably to have? Well, look, we can see it there on the screen, the skull and crossbones of the SS tattooed to your heart, and then also, does it show particular sort of political nous to take your shirt off in the Tune In, a renowned dive bar in DC, and show everyone that tattoo? That's got to be a career ender, right?
I would hope so. I don't know, though. I live in Virginia, where we had Ralph Northam as a governor. He had a scandal with blackface and a KKK costume, and this didn't have the effect.
And Jay Jones, who's running for Attorney General,
exactly,
won't pull out of the race despite sort of celebrating death. Are we sort of beyond the cancellation point now?
I kind of think we've reached this partisan point where we're going to back our guy no matter what, and every sort of attack is going to be, oh, that's coming from the right, that's coming from the left. This is our candidate, and we're going to stick with them.
Adrian, do you think people are, as Madeline said, that we're just bedding in now, and if it's all become so partisan that actually people 5, 6, 10 years ago, when we talk about cancel culture, but people that genuinely probably should not be elected politicians are able to get away with a degree of things on both sides now more than they would, because no one wants to give the other side a scalp.
Absolutely, it's my guy no matter what. And I would say about the tattoo, by the way, so I guess he's, a socialist of the nationalist kind.
Well, we worry about those two words when they're put together normally.
Correct. Yeah. But what I'm saying here is that also you've had enough time to also understand what that tattoo on your heart means.
Yeah.
Why haven't we covered that up? Because we definitely became sober after getting the tattoo, if that was the case. All this time has gone on. But yeah, taking the shirt off and showing everyone around. We live in a crazy world.
Well, and Bernie Sanders is standing by this guy. We are through the looking glass now, when the most famous left-wing politician in America, arguably, is standing by the guy who's a stream of racist Reddit comments and an SS tattoo. I mean, what next?
I think the lesson that the Democrats are learning is that you can do whatever you want, and whatever skeletons are in your closet, they can come out, and it will be okay.
Skeleton in the closet. There's a skeleton right there on his chest. Now, come on, right. Let's look at the other big story, the other big talker in town tonight. The bulldozers have begun demolishing. There we go. The east wing of the White House, this £250 million White House ballroom, will be, Donald Trump says, a welcome addition to the White House. But obviously the left and his critics are going bananas. Hillary Clinton tonight saying Trump is destroying the sanctity of the White House, which is a bit rich given what her husband did in the West Wing. But we'll gloss over that. Madeleine, I mean, it's not a great look, is it? But, you know, you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs. Is there any legal issues that Trump's going to run into this?
I'm not a legal expert, but I think the reason that people are freaking out is because they are primed to be upset at anything Trump does, any change that he makes. And I'm glad that you brought up Hillary Clinton, because she and her husband, when they left the White House, took $28,000 worth of furniture and other items that they had been given that they claimed that were for them, but were actually for the White House. And so they're saying, this is a sacred place, you can't mess it up, and here they were trying to take things.
But presidents over the past have done significant renovations to the White House.
Absolutely.
JFK, obviously, it was being completely gutted and refurnished. The West Wing was built, the East Wing was built. The president, in your view, then has his right to leave his mark and legacy on the grounds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Adrian, do you reckon the big, beautiful flag will survive another Democrat president? It'd be a brave president, I think, of any stripe to take down the ginormous American flag. I think the ballroom, is privately funded and clearly going ahead, and the Arc de Trump, we'll wait and see. But I think the patio, I think the Mar-a-Lago-style dining club, I think that might be ripped up by a future Democrat regime. What do you reckon?
Yeah, we'll see. I think at the end of the day, liberals were salivating at this photo of the demolition, right? And they just wanted that clickable headline that was like, he's destroying your house. Well, Eric Trump said, to Hillary Clinton, he had actually a great comeback. He said, the ballroom will be spectacular, unlike your work in Haiti. And listen, the mic has dropped. The mic has dropped.
Nothing that can't be a political football. I suspect we'll be hearing more about all of that again. Madeleine, thank you for joining us. Adrian, as ever. That is all we have got time for tonight. We will, you can't say we don't give you everything from ballrooms to Bibles to narco-terrorists to Sir Bill Browder at the top of the show. That's all we've got time for tonight. See you tomorrow for another episode of Harry Cole Saves the West. Don't forget to subscribe.